Welcome back to the Act Two podcast, a podcast for the real life working screenwriter. I'm Tasha Hugh.
And I am Josh Hallman.
It's good to see you again, Josh.
It's been forever.
As a reminder, Act Two is a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter, of which this podcast is just one of the things we do. So thank you for joining us here.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have an event here soon. I feel like we're due again because we had one end of last year.
I will be there.
Will you, though?
I will be there.
Everyone was asking about you.
Once again, for everyone who may have missed me, I am not injury prone and I do not get sick often. It just so happened that every time there is an event for Act Two, I get knocked out with something, whether it be a broken ankle, the coronavirus, something.
He's like, oh, it looks like Act 2 event is on my calendar this week. I'm going to throw myself down the stairs.
I'm almost scared. Don't even tell me when it is. Just,
I'll just show up at your house one day randomly. Get in the car.
Like, oh, okay, cool. Let's go. But yeah, we need another event. I can't wait. I'm going.
Yes. So subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on when that upcoming event is. You can also give us your rating, write a comment.
Yeah.
Tell us just how your writing life is going, which is, it's always fun to hear. Some people just email us and say, hey, this is what's going on. You reply and you're just like, cool, man.
I highly recommend just taking advantage of it because, you know, it's a good way to talk to people and it's a good way to understand what some people are going through. Some things we've already gone through, some things we haven't gone through, some things we know about, sometimes we don't, but it helps us try to figure things out.
Yeah. You know, remember last episode or the episode before, I told that really embarrassing story about how I had a chance to meet Evan Spiliotopoulos, who was a professional writer at the time when I was an assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't take it because I was so afraid to talk to a professional writer. Well, here's a chance. We're professional writers and we have an email address. You can just email us. Like if I had that back then, I would be annoying.
You know what I thought you were going to say? I thought you were going to say that since that episode came out, he messaged you and was like, hey, it's time for us to sit down.
Evan, if you're listening to this podcast, let's redo that dinner.
Just replay it. Get Katie, do it all over again.
Yeah. Here's my friend Katie. I brought her for a security blanket. Anyways, you can reach out to us with questions, topic suggestions. Just say hi at ActTwoWriters@gmail.com, all spelled out, or on our Instagram and Twitter at ActTwoWriters. I'm Story Thursday on Instagram and Tasha 3.0 on Twitter.
I'm Joshua Hallman on Twitter, Josh Hallman on Instagram.
Today is one of our favorite kinds of episodes.
Yes, it is.
Where we just get to talk about this week in writing and we get to do a fireside chat. And for those of you who are new and don't know what a fireside chat is, it's just stories of other writers in the industry, professional writers, things they've gone through that we are taking and regurgitating back at you just so you can kind of see just snapshots of what it's like to be a professional writer and I don't know, hiccups that come up along the way or do's and don'ts based on these stories. We tend to do fireside chats when something comes up that is like, wow, that's a really informative story of a writer's experience that I can't shake. And hopefully other people will feel the same way.
Fun fact, I once wrote half of a script called Fireside Chats, which you've read, which was an action movie about a girl who, after her grandfather passes away, she goes to clean out his house and finds this unreleased FDR radio recording of a fireside chat. And in it was the Roosevelt's like, there is a covert group hidden inside the United States. Beware. But the fireside chat never got released. And the girl gets it. She's like, oh my God. So she releases it and everyone comes after her. And then I stopped writing it.
I vaguely remember that premise now.
Yeah.
Huh. Would you ever go back to that?
Yeah.
That's pretty fun, actually.
It's very fun. I was feeling the National Treasure vibe, you know, like I like things where things are rooted in history, but then just completely altered. And you're like, maybe it's true. Maybe not. Yeah. Fake news. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, should we get into This Week in Writing?
This Week in Writing.
This Week in Writing.
Where do we begin, Tasha?
Can I begin with a question that we've gotten via email and a question we had then seen on Twitter, which caused us to be like, we should just fucking talk about this, which is this question of, am I too old to start my writing career? And the people who have said this are younger than us. So I just want to tell them no, but let's just discuss. That's the question. Discuss, Josh. What is your opinion about age and when you should start your career as a writer?
No, I don't think there's any rules. I mean, fortunately, and we've talked about this a lot, there's a lot of outlets where you can post scripts and you can get attention and people don't even know your age or anything about you. Now, I'm not going to pretend like there isn't ageism that exists within Hollywood. Not cool. But in the sense of kind of like getting your script out there and getting attention and meeting people, I don't think there should be anything that stops you. If it's something you want to do, it's something you want to do.
I agree. You have friends who are older and started their writing career older and are extremely successful.
I've met people and I know people personally who have hit their stride in their 40s, who have hit their stride late 30s, some that late 40s. And I've read, you read about these certain things, but I'm willing to bet that as time goes on, it's going to be more common that people with like certain life experiences and whatnot, there's going to be older batches of people. And by the way, like, I think that Twitter feed that you're referencing, the girl was 35. That's not too old.
No. So I was counting back. So 10 years ago is when I got my very first job.
You're 20.
It was 2014, if only. I was 30. I was 31, I guess, then. And so I came up as an assistant, and if it helps you, I was much older than the other assistants I was an assistant with, because most assistants in Hollywood are right out of college. It's their very first job. And I had not only gone to graduate school, but also had several jobs, many jobs, before I ended up as an assistant in Hollywood. And so a lot of people doubted that I could do this. There was very much a like, I'm writing you off because you should have had your shot by now and it's too late. People think, well, you're just going to be a career assistant at this point because of your age. And it's just not a realistic thing. Like Josh said, like that's kind of the beauty of our job. We don't have to be actors. So a script gets sent to someone, your age is nowhere on this fucking script. You could also change your name and write under a pen name and they won't even know what your real name is. Like there's so much anonymity to it until you go and meet this person in person in general. That's just right. Just be a good writer and the job, typically it takes time to build a career. Yes, that's true. But that doesn't mean that in your 30s is too late or in your 40s is too late. Everyone greets this career differently. Everyone has a very different path. So your success could be instant. Your success could take 10 years. But if you love it, just go for it. There's no age limit.
Yeah. The more I think about it is like the outlets like the Blacklist and Coverfly and, Screencraft, Script Pipeline, all these different options. I feel like those are more and more useful and kind of a necessity for people who are out of the state of California, who haven't lived here, who maybe are starting later, who don't know where to begin. I feel like competitions, like even if you can't travel there, if you have a family, that's what I would do. That's probably where I would start.
It's kind of a segue into one of my other This Weeks in Writings. I know I'm doing two back to back, but it seems to be hand in hand, which is a writer friend of mine and I were talking about people who have approached us recently who are friends and who want to get into screenwriting. And they are later in their lives. In the sense that they already have careers, they have families, they've sort of established themselves in one direction, but they couldn't shake the fact that they love movies and they love screenwriting and they really want to be a writer. And she was saying that this friend of hers, when she started to talk to him about, okay, well, like, tell me what kind of scripts you've written, and come to find out he's not finished anything. So he's written a lot of scripts, but has never gotten to the final page of any of them, and then moves on to the next. And in her head, though she didn't say this out loud, she had this feeling like, well, that's what separates you from being an aspiring writer versus being a writer. And I think that's something to consider when you're thinking about, like, am I too old to get into this business? Is are you ready for the business? I think is more the question to ask yourself, because
Yeah.
it does mean constantly writing. It does mean finding the time, even when you're doing, because now you're older, you have a life that's established. You probably have a mortgage or an expensive rent or something, right? You have all of these bills that you now have to pay somehow. And if it's not by writing right away, then that means you have to squeeze in time on your weekends or after work, etc. So like, are you ready to take on the career and actually finish these scripts or not? And that's really the question to wrestle with versus age, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the endless notes and the endless self-doubt and all that, I think there is a benefit to having it happen early on, because if you get through it at some point, you become numb to it. I know how that sounds, but there's the idea of, I know people who've gotten notes like for the first time, and maybe they're in their 40s or whatever, and they're so offended, and it's just like, oh my God, and it's like, there is a benefit to just getting the shit kicked out of you.
Here's what's interesting counterpoint to that is that when we had Mickey Fisher on, like last year, beginning of last year, sometime, it was a while ago, go back and listen to the episode. It's really, really good. He was someone who got into the business when he was older.
That's right.
And I mean, he was definitely well into his 30s, I think, if not further. And he was saying that his life experience actually made notes easier because like he had figured out who he was by then, right? He wasn't 20 years old, fresh out of college, and like thinking he was an auteur and everything was still very sensitive. Like, he's like, I lived a life, and so I felt like these people were my equals when he went into generals, versus us, where we're kind of coming out of college being like, oh my God, we're like, you're my idol, or you're my teacher, or the power dynamic is really off. He didn't have that problem coming in when he was older, which I think was an interesting insight.
Damn. Okay, yeah. It doesn't make any sense. Just
It doesn't make any sense.
But it's so hard. I get it. I get why someone would want to kind of like bow out at a certain time. Okay, I'm going to actually go to my This Week in Writing.
Let's go.
Which is from our guy, your guy that I took, now my guy, Dan Kunka.
Kunka!
Former podcast guest, future podcast guest, writer of Lyft, spec writer, the man. He wrote a tweet. Mm-hmm. A young writer asked me when I copyright my scripts. He was shocked when I said never. Don't worry about someone stealing your idea. Worry about having an idea worth stealing. And even then, don't worry about someone stealing your idea.
Yeah.
This all kind of ties together, because I think what you were just saying, and the idea of like finishing a script, I think not everyone can finish a script. And if it's not your idea, it's very hard to execute that idea. Does that make sense?
It does. You and I talk about this all the time on the podcast, which is if you and I were given the exact same concept and then wrote a spec, both of ours would be vastly different, because it's your point of view, it's your voice, it's everything. So I never really understood this. I think there's this, like, I also told this story on the podcast once before, but I remember I met for coffee with a friend of mine who I went to school with, and she was pitching me one of her new TV ideas. Mm-hmm. And she like leaned in and she like whispered the idea to me. And I was like, what are you doing? And she's like, I just don't want anyone else to hear. And I'm like, who? Like, who? Yes, this cafe that we're in is full of writers, but you really think your idea is so unique and amazing and also like complete in the way you're telling it to me right now over coffee that they're going to take it and go run with it? Like, it's just, it's silly.
I want to say, I agree that it's silly. I actually I'm usually 98% of the time am a person who will talk about the ideas that I'm working on.
Yeah.
Every once in a while. And it happened actually with you and I, with an idea that we're working on, where there's an idea that is so crystal clear and a concept that just makes so much sense that to me, it's like, oh, that's a no-brainer. How is this not?
Yeah.
But this is great. And so then I'm a little bit more reluctant to, broadcast it to anyone who will listen to me.
I feel like you keep telling me stories about you're pitching it to your friend over here and over there.
For
and
sure.
They're like, oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, that's because these are friends who will just be like, will give me like advice. It's not like I'm walking up to some stranger and it's being like, hey, I got an idea.
I do remember I pitched an idea to a friend and another writer, and they were like, damn it, that's a good idea. And you could see it in his eyes. Like, he's like, if I was a different person, I would steal that from you right now.
Totally. I don't know if we've all been there, but there's moments where you hear something, you're like, why didn't I write that? and it almost like inceptions your brain. Like you're like trying to think of an idea it's similar to that idea, but you don't want to step on the toes of that idea. And I don't know. It's a weird thing.
Again, even if we sort of pitched the concept of the spec that you and I are working on, anyone who tried to steal it would write a completely different movie than we would write. So I don't know. There's also no new idea. And then I think another thing that I was always afraid of when I first started was if I send my script to a producer, they might take that idea and put it into a different script. Right? Like steal whole cloth stuff from my script and inject it. And that's why I thought I needed to copyright things. And will that happen to you? I mean, sure, there's all kinds of stories. Like apparently Zootopia, they say, is actually taken from someone who pitched a different idea with all these animals wearing clothes and cops and stuff. And then there's a whole lawsuit about it, right? So like it happens. You can copyright your scripts if you want, if that gives you a peace of mind. But I think it's really there to just give you a peace of mind. It's not going to stop someone from stealing it if they're that kind of person. And I think there's like 1% of people in this business who are that kind of person.
Yeah.
And they're not, a copyright on the bottom of your title page is not going to stop them from doing that. I think it's a waste of money because you do have to pay for it. And it's also an amateur look on a title page if your thing is copyrighted because nobody does it. And it's immediately a sign of an amateur writer, unfortunately.
I will say, though, I am always a little surprised when, even on social media, on Twitter or on anything where people do like logline competitions. And like when I see that, I'm actually, it's weird that I'm saying this because I'm so open about talking about ideas. But when I see people like throwing their log line out, that always weirds me out because I'm like, why? I wouldn't do that.
See, but I look at those log lines and I think, man, that's cool. I can't write that. Or
that's
I wish I'd thought of that. But I guess if I was a sucky person, I might be like, that's a good idea. I'm going to try and... But again, a log line, what are you going to do with a log line? It's totally different than what anyone else is going to write. It's ridiculous.
Do you feel, if you had like a brilliant idea, would you feel more comfortable telling a fellow writer or just like a random producer? Like, would you feel like a producer would take your idea?
No.
Okay.
It'd be in the back of my mind. It's certainly possible. But what am I going to do? Like hoard all of my pitches until I'm 100% sure that this person's not going to steal it? When is that ever going to happen? Never.
I know. That's the thing.
Live in fear, Josh?
I was just going to say, you can't live in fear with all this stuff. Listen, you're talking to an open book about this stuff. I always talk about my ideas.
I feel like you're cagey about your ideas.
You're goddamn right.
I think it's funny you think you...
I do. I started this podcast talking about an idea. Yeah. Maybe I need to reevaluate my entire life.
Yeah, copywriting. Nah.
I don't copyright or anything.
It's not going to protect you anyway, so, you know. Okay. Speaking of our new idea, I want to talk about how you came over this morning and we finished breaking our spec idea. Yes. One of our spec ideas. And we have right behind me, there's a board full of cards of every scene that's in our movie.
Yeah.
And it's in Act 1, and there's an Act 2A, Act 2B, and a third act. And it's really exciting. They're color coordinated. Josh, how do you feel about, like, we're going to outline now. I'm going to write up to the midpoint. You're going to write from the midpoint on. Are you feeling good? Are you feeling nervous? Did you go home and just start writing? Because we talked about doing that because we were so jazzed.
I wish I did, but I did not.
Me neither.
I was jazzed in the moment, and then I drove home. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to get to this later.
Yeah.
But I am going to jump into it tomorrow because I don't want to lose. And I'm not going to like fully get into it, but there's just that momentum you and I talked about. But to answer your question, how am I feeling about our process?
Yeah.
Like, I'm feeling great. I feel really good about it. I'm interested to see what's going to happen here with me writing the second half. And then what we're doing is, what we talked about was after, in 2 weeks, we're going to regroup. And then I think you're going to send me the first half. And then I can kind of reconstruct my second half based off of if things change within your first half, right?
Yeah.
But the general big strokes will be there unless you throw me a curveball and like, by the way, I changed 2 characters. They're not in it
That's what's
anymore.
crazy about this process, though, is you and I had to have this conversation at the end of it, which is like, it's okay if when we get to outline, something goes wrong. And like, don't panic if we realize that we didn't break this scene properly and it shouldn't be here, or it's the wrong beat, or we don't know what's actually going to happen. Like, that's okay. Like, that's part of this process. And I think that's important to remember. I was just having a meeting today with another friend of mine who I am working on a TV pilot pitch with. And she did a draft of our pitch script together. And then I'm going to do sort of the same thing with us. I'm going to revise that pitch script after she did the first pass. And it was interesting in reading her pitch script, she changed things in it, like pretty drastically in certain points of like what the character does for a living. And there's this new scene where now the character like dies in the pilot and it's their main character. But they were really cool. And she's like, yeah, when I was just, feeling my way through the pitch script, like these just came up as ideas for me, or I realized that I had questions here as I had to actually like pitch it to someone. And this was my version of answering it. So like, I love that about the writing process, but it's also extremely frustrating, and why it's so hard to kind of like teach writing or tell other writers how to write and what the process is, because it's constantly changing and you have to be so flexible for that and not get scared. So I had that conversation with you because I was like reminding myself to not freak out if there's like a hole when we start to go to outline.
I'm expecting it. What we've written, there's a mystery element to it. So I'm expecting there to be some holes, although I feel like we're in really good shape because we spent a lot of time talking about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I'm just saying this on the podcast here to hold us both accountable. And also in case you do this, then I can reference this and then come back to it. Is if you do kill off someone in like Act 1 or change someone's profession, maybe let me know when it happens so I don't just write the entire second half of the outline.
Surprise!
I'm like, oh, by the way, are you feeling good about it?
I feel great. I'm bummed I didn't have the oomph to get into it today because I was like riding high off our emotions of finishing it. Yeah. And I'm not gonna be able to work on it tomorrow because of my schedule. So like I'm not gonna be able to get into this until maybe like Super Bowl Sunday. But I feel like I wanna like wake up early and get into it when I like feel really fresh because I'm just really excited and I want my head to be clear and only focused on this when I get down to it.
Same. Yeah. I need to get into it like at least a couple, like within 2 to 3 days. Otherwise, like today we had to repitch everything. Okay, I'm going to do one more this weekend. I actually have 2 more. One's like small.
I have one more too. Go for it.
Okay, then I'll do my small one last. As you may have been aware, the world has now been introduced to the Apple Vision Pro. And I couldn't help but look at it and think about not only how the world is changing, but also the world of screenwriting. And I just have to bring this up because I do feel like we're in we're in the future, like it's here. And the Vision Pro is only going to get better. And I was just thinking about our time in the future where let's just say we'll both be wearing one of these things and we're sitting next to each other in a room and we're typing and we're collaborating on things, but we're not even with each other, which will be cool. And like, how is it going to change screenwriting? How big is the screen going to be? Will a writer's room be different? Like all these things are now like in play in the next 10 years. That I think the theater going experience might change. That's all. What do you think? How are you feeling about it?
I don't know, man. Paul turned on Ready Player One 2 nights ago.
Nice.
And 5 minutes in, I was like, turn it off. He's like, why? It's my favorite movie. I was like, turn it off. It's depressing me because that's literally real now. Just even the look of his glasses. I mean, Spielberg does such a good job in his research in terms of like when Minority Report came out as well, just like a lot of conversations with futurists and things, what real things could be down the line. And so I think he really nailed it. But Joshua, the more videos I see of the Apple Vision Pro, the more I'm realizing like, there's definitely no turning back. And you know how I feel about AI and technology and all this stuff. And I think I've turned a corner and like learning that at least accepting that I need to let go of my resistance.
Let go, let flow.
I can see there are going to be fun benefits to the Apple Vision Pro. Like right now, it's like, it's no different than having a computer screen. It's just like cool that there's an AR like facet to it, but it's no different than just having a big computer screen or having multiple computer screens. However, that I'm sure will very quickly change. And I'm curious how it will make screenwriting easier or more interesting. You and I today were talking about, man, like the marker on this whiteboard isn't rubbing off. Like it'd be great to have a digital whiteboard that can just follow my hand as I write through the air, and I can move cards around, and so like that's super fucking cool. I just in-person stuff I never want to go away, and that's coming from someone who hates people. Misanthrope. So I don't know, we'll see, play by ear, I guess.
Well, at the end of this month, actually, I know someone who ordered one and it's coming, and he said I could play with it, so I'll report back.
Please do. I can't wait.
Oh man. Okay.
My next one is happier. I started watching Shrinking with Harrison Ford, Jason Segel. Brett Goldstein's one of the creators who plays Roy Kent in Ted Lasso. And everyone, if you remember when it came out, was like, oh, this is the next Ted Lasso. And so we definitely put it on our list. And then like as it was kind of hanging out there on Apple TV, people were saying like, it's not as good as Ted Lasso, or just, and you know what? It's so good.
Is it better than Ted? What do you feel about Ted Lasso? Is it better?
I love Ted Lasso. It's one of the best shows ever created. It's different. I wouldn't say it's better. It doesn't have as many warm feelings as Ted Lasso. However, it's a similar warmth to it. It's funnier, I think, than Ted Lasso, like laugh out loud funnier.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Seeing Harrison Ford in a TV show is just fantastic, because anytime you can get more than 2 hours of Harrison Ford in a sitting is always a good time. But it's super witty. It's so well written. It's very moving. And it has that Ted Lasso feel in that you expect, because you're a fan of TV and you watch enough dramas, that, you know, you expect a character to make the wrong choice, because that's drama, right?
Yeah.
But like in Ted Lasso, they make the good choice. They make the good human choice. And you're like, oh, it's so warm and fulfilling. And I think that, I'm going to say revolutionizes drama, but that's a really big word. But it's proof that drama can come from not always doing the bad thing. Yeah. Right? Yeah. It's great. Just go see it. Harrison Ford, man.
You know what? I'm going to jam in 2 more this week in writing. One of them is super duper small. Like that's so what small.
This episode is.
A second one actually is going to tie into my Fireside Chat.
Okay.
The super small thing is my daughter and I got into the Percy Jackson series on Disney Plus. Yeah. And it got to a point where she was just like obsessed with watching it. And we were watching it weekly. And I started to realize the show was coming out at 6 p.m. on Tuesdays. And she then would wait and like look at the clock on Tuesdays and be like, when's Percy Jackson coming? When's Percy Jackson? I'm like, 6 o'clock. Yeah, I get the update on my phone. Like, let's watch it. And it brought me back to this time where you waited for your show to start. I just missed it. And I actually am reminded that binge watching is great, but I think the model of like the weekly model for shows that are good is the way to go, because it just keeps you invested for like 10 weeks or whatever it is, minimum.
Gosh, I love that. That like just that story gave me that familiar warmth from when we were younger.
All right. And this is it. This will all connect. I was talking to Trent Johnson, our friend in the writers group, who has probably listened to -4 minutes of this podcast.
That's true. Just like as a personal philosophy, like you will not listen.
I know you guys. I'm not going to listen to you talk anymore.
Yeah, I'm good.
So we were talking, and he asked me if I watched Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the TV show on Amazon Prime. I said, yes, I really like it. And he said, I love it. And it reminded me of you. And I said, that's very flattering. Thank you, Trent. And so we started to talk about the tone of the show and what constitutes a comedy, what constitutes a drama, what constitutes an action film, how they're all kind of melded together, how that show was pitched. And it just turned into a little bit of a larger conversation where it was like, I'm sure Trent wouldn't mind saying this and whatever. He was just like, at some point we should just like look at shows for the length that they are, because that might dictate if it's like like Ted Lasso, for instance. It's got heart and it's got so much humor and probably shrinking. And we've just blended so many different themes and tones that it's hard to just say, oh, that's a comedy. Like because people think everyone has a different view of what is funny, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what's comedy or what's drama? That's not drama to me, And so I don't know exactly what the big point of this was, but just like the idea that something can be multiple things. And I think we a lot of times put a lot of pressure on like what it should be.
Narrowing it down.
Narrowing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my big follow-up question, or like concern, I guess. I never fucking talked to Trent ever outside of Writers Group. You're just talking to him? Like, I don't think I even have his number.
We were texting.
What? How come he doesn't text me?
Because you don't have his number.
He has nothing to say to me?
I'm surprised Trent even talks to me at this point. I've wronged him so many times.
I invite Trent to things. Trent shows up to more of my events than you do, actually, but I can't remember the last time he's texted me.
Dude, I love Trent.
I love Trent. Okay. Let's go. Fireside Chat.
Fireside Chat. Oh, I wanted to tell a Trent story there. But all right. Fireside Chat. So, and you'll see how this connects to what I just talked about. Mm-hmm. I have a friend. She's a writer-director. I was talking with her, and she has, for the sake of this, we're emphasizing on the writing. And her kind of forte is kind of like Blumhousian, smaller drama thrillers. She's done features. I think she's written some pilots. And I was talking to her, and she was saying that she wanted to write something that was a little bit more of like something with like a family dynamic and make it a little bit more of a comedic kind of like the comedy comes from the family, not slapsticky, but just like Succession-y maybe, like tonally, like that's kind of like grounded, but with humor. So she writes what I believe is a feature, I might be a pilot. She writes the script, sends it to her manager. She has a manager and she has an agent, but she's closer with her manager, which I think a lot of us are. Sends it to the manager and and the manager gets back to her and is like, I just don't get it. Like, and I don't think it's funny. Like, I don't really understand it. And so kind of irked her a little bit because number one, it was, I think, somewhat based off of some of her family stuff. And just on a side note, a lot of times when you write personal stuff and people don't get it, it does kind of hit you a little differently. So just taking that into consideration. So I started to chat with her a bit, and then she was saying that like she's actually kind of wanted to possibly part ways with her manager. They've been together for a little while. But she doesn't want to be into a place where she's without a manager, because I don't know how close she is with her agent, but this was an idea that she really loved. And those notes from her manager really kind of messed her up, and she tried to tweak it a little bit and was getting a little bit away from herself. But now that she's like gone back to the normal tone, and this was like one of those things where she was like, my funny is different than his funny. This is supposed to be kind of be like a darkerish comedy that comes from maybe pain from characters, but something that is relatable. So she was like, what do you think I should do? And now Tasha, in true Fireside Chat form.
Yeah.
What would you say to her?
I feel like I have like multiple follow-ups that
please. I will fill in as much as I can.
I guess one question I would have is, do you think there's any validity to the notes that he has? Because maybe are you like so close to it that you need to take a step back for a second?
Great question. I asked something similar. I was like, well, how much do you trust this person? And she said there is some validity. And she was like, I'm willing to like make tweaks, but I think like the bigger picture of kind of like the dynamics within the family, like weren't believable to the manager, whereas they actually happened to her. And so I think she is open to adjusting, but I think it's more so like the idea of like, this isn't I don't find this funny at all. This isn't a comedy. I
Mm-hmm.
think that was a big, like the tone of it all, which is kind of going back to what I was just talking about with Mr. and Mrs. Smith, like that idea of like, well, who's to say this isn't funny?
Sure. Okay, so then my next question would be, has she gotten feedback from other people and they find it to be funny and
Yes.
believable?
Yes. They,
Okay.
her core group, which was not me, has given her feedback and they like it.
Okay. Then my next question would be, will the manager push it anyways? Like before leaving your manager, especially if she has a good relationship up until this point. If it's been a rocky relationship and this is just like the last straw on the camel's back, then that's a different situation. But it sounds like in your setup that she has a better relationship with this person. So I feel like their job is to be like, even if you don't get it, I believe in it. And I will address your notes to the point where I think they matter, but I'm ready to take this out. And it's up to them to do that job because that's their job. And then the disappointment factor may be you may get notes back from people saying, I don't get it. This doesn't feel realistic. And then you have to deal with that new news then. But I would have that conversation with them about like, hey, I really believe in this. This is why. This is real to me. And I think that specificity of life experience is actually going to be what makes this special. And, you know, pitch your project of why you think it's marketable and then ask them to take it out. If they still refuse to do that, then I think it's time to have that conversation because that's a business thing. That's a problem in your relationship. But I don't think it's quite time to jump ship yet. I feel like there's a few steps before then, in my opinion.
I agree. Okay, that's great advice. I basically said something like somewhat similar, like where I suggested showing it to her agent and then seeing what
Great
the agent
idea.
says. And if the agent likes it, then go back to the manager or talk to the manager first, see what the manager has to say. If the manager's still not on board, then go to the agent. If the agent's still not on board, then, you know, there's a problem. And
Yeah.
if the agent's on board, then...
Yeah. I mean, I've talked about the short story that I wrote that my agents didn't like, that my manager did like. So, like, my agents were kind of like, well, I mean, we can send this to some people, but we don't think anyone will buy it. And I think they're wrong. And, you know, you guys have read it, have given me good feedback. There's other people, other writers who I really trust who think about the business side of things, who have read it and been like, this is ready to go. So it sounds like a very similar situation to her. So what I did was, rather than fire my agents, I just went through my own back door and like sent it to people who like me as a writer and as a person, to just ask for their genuine feedback, to just see if, you know, my agents are wrong or they're right, or if there's some place in the middle that I can meet them.
And how's it been?
So that might also be a step. They haven't gotten back to me yet. It's been a month.
Losers. Okay, that's good. I like that. The back door is also a good thing. Yeah.
That's a good one. It's a good fireside chat. Okay, here I go with mine. This is a story that comes to me from a writer friend of mine. So it's, you know, like second, third hand, about a writer that she knows. Oh. And this writer had a spec feature that was just sitting there, not really doing anything. This writer was just using it as a sample to send out to try to get jobs. But she wasn't really getting any hits on it like, we want to make this. And then finally, a producer read it who did like it and did want to make it.
Let's go.
And was willing to, I know. And suddenly this old spec feature had new life. And this producer paid the writer even to do a pass on it, to address some notes, because the producer said, I love this concept. I love your voice, but I do think there's some clarity things that we need to fix a little bit to get it where it needs to go, to actually sell it. So here's a little bit of money. Please go do that. Great. Like, that's the best case scenario, to actually have a producer pay you to do this pass. So the writer does this pass, and then the producer continues to give her notes. And at this point, like, the money's run out. I think the writer at this point is frustrated, probably because they've had this movie, you know, on their desktop for ages, because it's just been sitting there, and they're probably tired of it. We have plenty of scripts like that we're just tired of by now. And so to get more notes from this producer, I think just felt like just too much work. And so my friend would hear a lot of complaints from this writer that she knows about, all the notes I have to address, But she would always be like, well, is it getting better? And the writer would be like, yeah, it's getting better. Okay, well then, like, this is great. This is part of the process, right? So the script gets to a point where an actress attaches herself, like a big name actress attaches herself. And this is obviously extremely exciting and extremely rare. And this actress also happens to have like just really good creative sense, apparently. Like their notes are actually like really insightful and all of that. And then because this actor gets attached, a director also attached themselves who also has some pretty great movies in their repertoire. So like this couldn't be any more than the most amazing scenario possible.
Yeah.
But then the actress has some notes. If I'm going to be in this movie, I would like some of these things to shift just a bit. Just a little bit more thought put into these things. And again, they were apparently very insightful notes. And this writer addressed the notes, but did it like really, really quickly. Like clearly didn't put a lot of thought into it. Was just like, I need to get this out. Like there was just a sense of hurry to this writer. I don't know if it comes from a place of panic, a place of fear, what it is, but there's a sense that I think this writer wants to just sell this thing already. Just get it out there into the world. Like, because nobody's seen it yet, right? Like studios haven't seen it yet. It's just been being revised and then people attaching themselves. And so the actor, read this new revised script and was like, to the producer, was like, what is this? Like, this is not what we talked about. This is not moving the script forward in a way that makes me comfortable to be the star in this and to put my name on it. Like, I don't know, like, how do we get through to this writer? And the problem is that it seems like the writer has stopped listening to the producer because after so many notes, she's just tired of listening to the producer. So she's happy to listen to the actor and the director because they're new. They're new people who have new thoughts and okay, I'll listen to them. But they all have the same notes as the producer does. So it's been this interesting dynamic where the producer, of course, wants to sell this movie, just like the writer does, just like the actor and the director do. But there's this hurdle with the writer who is, I think, being stubborn about addressing notes and about being open to a process that does take a long time and is really hard because she's anxious to just get it out. And you and I have been, I'm sure, through this like every time you write a spec, I know these conversations come up. This has come up with me with my short story, just like, and if you remember, I was developing that pilot, the woman, and like every time I would get notes, it was like, this is ready to go. Like, why do I have to do these notes? It comes up every time we write something. But it was just interesting to me to see it from sort of this third person point of view. It's almost like a mirror was shined back at me, being like, you do have to have patience with the process, especially if you have these attachments, right? Like, it's very exciting. Just do the work and don't be impatient, I guess. I don't know. That's the story.
No, that's great. When I agree. When there's the attachments, I feel like it's a clean slate. I feel like you have to just mentally clean your brain out and be like, okay, I might have to just dive back in and do things that maybe the producer said not to do, or maybe didn't want it, whatever it may be. Yeah. You just have to kind of dive back into it, but it is very frustrating.
Yeah.
I do want, like what you were talking about, like, I wonder if there's like an element of, I don't want to say self-sabotage, but like an element of feeling like someone knows more than the people giving them the notes. And therefore you're going to like kind of address the notes, but not really, because they're going to, like, the actor will understand, just the actor's behind and not on board with this.
Self-sabotage came up for me when I heard this story as well, that it feels like there might be some fear there somehow about like committing to this project. I don't know, like, because self-sabotage is just such a multi-layered beast, and I don't fully get it. And like with my Evan Spiliotopoulos story, there's a dialogue that goes on in your head that makes complete sense to you in the moment that is completely pushing you down. So I would be curious what like this particular writer's sort of head dialogue is about why I'm not going to do the things that are necessary to get it sold. Because what's interesting to me is like everyone on this team has the same mission as the writer. Sell it for as much money as possible and get it made. Right. So like the fact that you think that they are the villain, that they are against you, It's interesting because I think sometimes we sort of carry on that narrative on the podcast as well and in our own lives. Like, it's us against them being the producers. And in many ways, that's how it feels because they're the ones pushing back, giving us notes and trying to change our creative vision and all that stuff. So it does feel like we're at odds with each other. But when it comes to working on a project together, they are on this project with you.
Mm-hmm.
They are your teammate. And if they seem to be destructive, it's maybe because they're giving the wrong note, or like they're not really trying to destroy the project because they're invested, maybe monetarily already, right? They've already hired this writer to do a revision of the movie. So it's important to remember you are part of a team, even when they are frustrating. And that's part of the job too, is figuring out how to work with teammates who might frustrate you.
Beautifully said.
This job's hard. See, it's not about what age you are. It's about, can you handle how terrible it is?
just don't let it throw you in depression.
It's funny though, because my mom is an electrical engineer, and she was just telling me a story this last weekend about someone that she works with who has a very similar voice as a lot of producers in our business, particularly like the older producer you talk about who's like more old school, just kind of no nonsense, fuck you, my ego above everyone else, and I'm the smartest person in the room, even when they're not. Yeah. And it was just a reminder that our business is not special. It's just like every other business. There are assholes, there are great people. It's just a job, just like any other industry.
Yeah, but man, it's a crazy industry.
It has its own uniqueness for sure in other ways.
You could say that. All right.
Do you feel beaten down by my sad story?
Let's go back to the Percy Jackson thing.
I know. I'm just so excited that Amelia sits on the couch and is waiting for 6:00 to come.
I know.
Is there any other ritual around it, by the way? Is there like popcorn involved or a blanket that's always gotten at this time?
So the truth is, we ended up having to move, I think around week 5, and now it's been 8 episodes. We ended up moving Percy Jackson. Even though she was really excited it came out Tuesday, we had to move it to Friday and turned it into our Friday night movie night.
Okay.
And that's where the ritual started. But like once she quickly, we always do Friday night movie night. And once she learned that it was Tuesday, it was like week 2, 3, 4. And then finally she was like, I want Raisinets and popcorn. I was like, you are my daughter.
Good girl.
If I didn't know before, I know now.
That's so cute. Oh man, I miss that.
Oh, it's so good. Just crushing popcorn and pizza and snacks. God, life is good.
I want to go to a movie right now.
This is great. These were good fireside chats.
Yeah. I hope your friend figures it out. That's tough.
I hope she does too.
Sending good thoughts their way. Quote of the day. You need to get used to the task of writing. You must make an effort to learn to regard it not as something painful, but as routine. But most people tend to give up halfway, and that becomes habit, and they'll give up as soon as it gets hard. So I say write all the way to the end no matter what. Akira Kurosawa. Please remember to rate and subscribe. Follow us at ActTwoWriters for more awesome writing stuff. You can follow me, Tasha, at Story Thursday on Instagram or on Twitter at Tasha 3.0.
I'm Joshua Hallman on Twitter, Josh Hallman on Instagram.
And as always, the Act Two podcast is a production of Act Two, a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter. This episode was edited by Paul Lundquist.